available for all live.
And remember, every vote counts.
You're listening to Positive Vibes with Shane Nikolic, making positivity and gratitude louder in a podcast world. Positive Vibes with Shane Nikolic. Good morning and welcome to this week's edition of Positive Vibes, making positivity and gratitude louder in a podcast world. This morning something came up and my guest was unable to make it this morning, but I'm just gonna roll with this, and I figured I'd just go ahead and continue where I left off last week, reading from the book I wrote, my autobiography, Live the Passionate Life and Quit Settling for Survival. And I think pretty sure where I left off. I'll just start back here. Just a few lines on the page before. I would love to be able to tell you that I stopped running away and started being a totally obedient child, but I kept it up and continued being a bad kid. Just to back up a little bit for anyone who wasn't watching or listening last week, didn't catch last week's episode, I was reading about a runaway trip I was on with a friend, a buddy, and he was, he got caught stealing, was getting in trouble with the police, and I saw this from a distance, and so I just took off. Not took off running, I just walked away. And I would love to be able to tell you that I stopped running away and started being a totally obedient child, but I kept it up and continued being a bad kid. I could recount a multitude of stories of my days as a teenage alcoholic drug addict, drinking, doing drugs, smoking cigarettes, stealing, running away from home, etc., etc. Instead, I'll shorten it up simply by stating that none of the drugs, booze, cigarettes, stealing, running away, none of it made me feel better in the long run. It all just left me feeling like crap. I finally reached my bottom when I was 16. After spending 4.5 years in a self-imposed prison of booze, drugs, and good times, I found myself looking down into a bottomless pit, which was the remainder of my life, if I kept doing the stupid things I had been doing. After having a spiritual awakening and thinking about my life, where I was actually going instead of where I would like to be going, I came to the conclusion that should I have carried on the way I was going, I was and am still positive that I would have ended up dead or locked up forever and a day. I sent out a 911 prayer and asked God to please help me out of the bind I was in at the time, and in return, I would never drink alcohol or do drugs again. I remained dry, no alcohol or drugs, for 9 or 10 months and got to the point where I had to make a decision. I had already made the decision to be clean and sober. I was not about to turn back to my previous existence, which was simply a life of intoxicated and troubled actions with good-natured intentions mixed in. I was in a depressive mood in which I was feeling trapped with no route of escape. Looking back, I can see that I have been depressive since my brain injury, but I just self-medicated with alcohol and drugs, so I was never diagnosed as such. On this particular afternoon, however, I came up with the idea that since I wasn't going back to the alcohol and drugs, I would just kill myself. This would not only end my personal problems, but also the problems of those near to me that I was a constant disappointment to. That is where my twisted mind was at that time anyway. I was sunk so deep inside my depression I could not see the forest for the trees, and I figured that suicide was logically the simplest solution. Obviously, the Suicide King was not even in my hand, since a whole different hand was played that night. I got a couple of God shots that night, both being suggestions to go to a 12-step meeting. At the first suggestion from my mom, I thought, okay, I will go just to suffice my mom. My mom had been an active member of this program for many moons, as my stepdad was also. A few months earlier, I had moved in with them, as I had just returned from what was to be my last trip running away, and my house was in turmoil. The second suggestion that I get my butt to a meeting came from my doctor. When my mom had asked me why I was looking so depressed right before I was going to kill myself, I let the floodgates swing open and told her everything on my mind, exactly how I felt about the situation and what I was about to do. When we got to my doctor's appointment, which I would have missed had I gone through with killing myself, I opened up and told my doctor everything I had told my mom earlier that evening. When I had finished speaking, he immediately spun around in his chair and proceeded to pull a little book out of the middle drawer of his desk. I recognized the book right away, as my mom had a copy of it in her pickup truck. It was a schedule for the local 12-step meetings. My doctor opened it up by chance to the right page and said, "Hey, there's a young people's meeting starting in town in about 15 minutes. You better get out of here so you can get there on time. Tell you what, I'll meet you there." I had thought I would just go along with the first suggestion just to appease my mom, but after the second suggestion was given to me within an hour of the first one, I took it as a sign that my going to that meeting was part of the master plan. I knew of the 12-step program and the fellowship since my mom and various other people in my life had been members for years. So I was familiar with the whole concept and felt comfortable going to the meeting that night. My mom dropped me off at the meeting, which had been at the same place for years. She had actually started that same young people's meeting with the help of her first sponsor when I had been only a few months old. It is all part of the plan. As soon as I walked into that meeting, I knew I was where I was supposed to be. Immediately I was welcomed by everyone in the room and shown where the coffee pot was. I had even known one guy already, as he was a classmate of mine at school. As I stated before, I knew of the program, but I paid close attention to the readings and discussions this night as never before, since my life depended upon it. I didn't really relate too much when it came to the circumstances of most of the people's stories, as I was only 17 at the time and had not had the opportunity to gain a house, wife, kids, cars, career, etc., let alone lose them. However, the major thing which I really connected to was the fact that we had all lost ourselves to alcohol, drugs, whatever other addictions we had, to the point where they had control over our thoughts and actions, a lot more than we thought they did. I can only speak for myself and share my own opinions, so don't take what I say as something that is written elsewhere written in stone. I worked the 12-step program to the best of my ability, following the suggestions that were given to me in the books and by other members who had been there and worked it before me. I could handle this one day at a time thing. That is the only way life has, does, or will pass for you, me, or anyone else. But simply stating the phrase, one day at a time, breaks it down in my mind. I don't know how your mind works, but for me, I like to keep things as simple as I can because it is easier to wrap my mind around smaller, simpler ideas or concepts. That's not to say that I don't think about some very complex stuff, but I hope you know what I'm trying to get at. Being clean and sober, having a clear head to think with, and having transferred to an alternative high school where I could work at my own rate, I ended up completing my last 3 years of high school in a year and a half. A few times I even completed a full credit's worth of work over a weekend. I found I could do a lot more if I actually applied myself to the work I had to do instead of just procrastinating. Over that last year and a half, I served as ASB treasurer for both school years, school newspaper reporter both years, and editor for one of those years. I was getting back into life, whereas in my past, my semi-constant state of intoxication held me back from full participation in life. Now, I was even attending the recovery group at school and helping fellow students start their journeys in recovery. Oh, good morning, Ronald. Good morning from Tacoma. Good to see you in Leavenworth. Have fun there. I finished and turned in the very last of my schoolwork for high school on a Monday in March 1994. I attended one of my usual meetings the next night and met a newcomer who hired me to work for the business he owned. On Wednesday morning, he came to my house and picked me up for work and took me home after work. On Wednesday morning, he came to my house and picked me up for work and took me home after work. He spoke with his wife, and they decided it would be beneficial for everyone if I just moved into their house. Then I would not have to worry about getting to work, and they would not have to put out the extra effort for transporting me back and forth. I will tell you that besides not being financially able to handle the responsibility of having a car, I never did trust my visual motor skills, hand-eye coordination, enough to drive safely. I did have my learner's permit when I was 15 and a half years old, but never did anything after that so far as working toward getting my driver's license. My boss's wife and I became very good friends and would sit and talk quite a lot about alcoholism and addiction, work, and life in general, as my boss was often relapsing on his drug of choice and spending countless hours working in the shop, which was in the backyard of their house. We would go to the store and get some groceries, then proceed to come back home and have tea and crumpets, literally tea and crumpets, while discussing life and stuff. As a graduation present, she even paid for me to have my hair braided at a local salon when it came time for my graduation ceremony in June of 1994. It was literally a pain in my butt having that done, as it took about 6 hours. Although I did get up a couple of times to go outside and smoke a cigarette, which gave me a chance to stretch my muscles. An unhealthy way to stretch your muscles, get up and have a cigarette. But at any rate, it must have been quite a sight seeing me with 52 little braids sticking out from beneath my graduation cap that night. I had previously tried a few times to put my hair into dreadlocks to no avail, so my boss's wife figured she would have this done for me as it was my next idea. I was a valedictorian at the graduation ceremony, and gave a good speech, even pointing out that my grandma and grandpa, who were also on the stage with me, grandma being a teacher's aide at my high school and grandpa being on the board at the local school district. My parents had given me the ultimatum about a week before I finished school in March to either get a job or a job in a different place to live within 2 weeks. I had done both in 1 week, and I was doing well, considering all the obstacles I had overcome to get to where I was. That summer, I had the brilliant idea to move in with a friend at his parents' house about 15 or 20 miles away from my job. I could not see myself riding my bicycle to work and back while working full-time hours, and my friend's dad was not going to give him money for gas to be my personal driver. So my buddy and I spent the summer going to meetings and hanging out at his house. He drove me around while I did the whole looking for work thing, but I never did find a job that summer. I was going out with a girl I had met at a campground when my buddy and I were at a recovery campout earlier that summer. Toward the end of the summer, my friend went with his family on a mini vacation for the weekend. Before they left, his dad told me that since I had been unable to find a job and had no means to pay rent or anything, I needed to find another place to live before they returned at the end of the weekend. I called my girlfriend, thinking that she would come up with something that we could come up with something between the two of us, so far as a solution. She drove to the house and we talked for a short time before she broke up with me. Well, what could I have expected? Here I was, no job and about to be homeless. I didn't expect her to break up with me, but maybe she had been wanting to do it for some other reason anyway. I didn't feel like riding my bike when I left the house on Saturday afternoon, not too long after my girlfriend left, so I left on foot. I walked about 15 miles back toward my hometown, getting close to town not too long after sunset. I had to go to the bathroom and I was coming up on a friend's house anyway, so I stopped there. He offered me a couch to sleep on, so I stayed there a couple of nights. I had stopped by the store where my old boss's wife worked and talked to her about the events that had recently transpired. That night, I went to a meeting in town and ran into my old boss. He said he had talked to his wife and they decided I could have my old room and job back. Yay! I took the opportunity and I was living the dream again so far as having a job, a place to live, and money in my pocket. I had gone down and gotten my bike and the majority of my belongings from my friend's house that I had been kicked out of. My friend's dad had put some of my belongings in the back of his old pickup out in the yard, and they were ruined by being rained on. While the majority of my stuff was perfectly fine since it had been piled on their front porch, which had a roof over it. That sort of sucked, but if I had contacted them sooner, maybe they would not have been so hasty about tossing my stuff out in the open. I was ticked off about it, but in the end it was my fault for leaving my stuff there when I had been kicked out. My job was going well and I was doing great for a few months, as I had already said. And I even did my first long-distance bicycle ride during that time. In late 1994, people in the fellowship began talking about going to their international convention in San Diego. Some of my friends were carpooling. In 1994, people in the 12-step fellowship I was a member of began talking about going to the international convention in San Diego. Some of my friends were carpooling and some of them were flying down there. I was thinking that I would like to go, so I sent in my registration form and the fee to get me into the festivities that coming summer. Then I was thinking about transportation. How was I going to get to San Diego and back? I was talking about it at a meeting one day, and one of my friends suggested, "Shane, you ride your bicycle everywhere you go. Why not ride it to the convention?" That had never crossed my mind, but it sounded like a feasible idea. My buddy also suggested that I get people to sponsor me so that I had enough money to complete my trek. It was on. One of my friends even loaned me the money to get a better bike to ride to San Diego. I replaced the department store $80 special bike I had been riding with a slightly used 21-speed Sakai mountain bike, which I bought slicks for since it's a whole lot easier to ride on pavement without fat tread on your tires. When I was not working, I was training or trying to raise funds for my trek to California. I planned my trip in the simplest way. I looked at a map, decided on the route I would take, roughly figured how long it would take me, and added a couple extra days for wiggle room, and packed a few extra clothes in a backpack. To begin my ride, a friend gave me a ride to Aberdeen, Washington, where I stayed the night in a motel and double, even triple checked my backpack and saddlebags to make sure I had everything I would need for the road. I had been very thorough before I had even left the house, but it never hurts to check again. It really sucks to get out on the open road with no stores around and then realize that you don't have something you should have brought along. I got a halfway decent night's sleep and was hitting the road as the sun was just emerging from the eastern horizon. It was just me, my bike, and the road for the first day. Oh yeah, and my Walkman, blaring Rage Against the Machine into my earphones. I was doing it, bicycling hundreds of miles down the highway when doctors had at one time given me the prognosis of being unable to even walk. God is good. Somewhere along the way, I was getting bored with just one cassette tape of music, so the next department store I came to, I went in and picked up White Zombie Astro Creep 2000. That was just the kick I needed to get pumped up again. At any rate, I definitely put on some miles on that first day, making it to Astoria, Oregon. I don't even remember the name of the motel I stayed at that night, only that it was the first inexpensive vacancy I found. In the morning, I was in the lobby of the motel eating donuts and drinking coffee when I happened to meet some fellow travelers. There were a group of 3 friends, 2 guys and a gal, who were also riding south on Highway 101, cycling, as they were on a summertime adventure. I hooked up with them and we rode to Seaside, Oregon, stopping at a youth hostel and stayed the night there. I loved it. The hostel was only $15 a night, whereas motel room had cost me at least 3 times that much. It was not as nice as a motel, but I just needed a place to crash for the night, so it worked perfect. In the morning, I found that my new cycling friends were not leaving right away as they needed a day of rest. So I opted to just stay put and rest up as well. The young lady in the group asked me if I would like to accompany her into town for some shopping, at which I agreed to go with her since I am always game to explore new places. That day, I ate my first ever veggie burger, which I bought when we stopped at a fast food type health food cafe. We didn't do much shopping that day as my riding buddy had intended to do. We were just leisurely cruising around town, me just enjoying being in a new place while she was checking in with friends she had not seen in a very long time as she used to live nearby. I spent one more night there, and when I woke in the morning, got my bags and bike ready to head out on the road, and then went to the lobby and drank some coffee and ate a couple of pastries before my cycling companions emerged from their bunks. When they came outside, they informed me they had decided to ride back up by Portland and that I was more than welcome to continue riding with them. It was an enticing invitation, yet I had to decline since I was on somewhat of a schedule and did have to make it to San Diego for the convention that I was going to. We said our goodbyes and took off riding in separate directions. Their original trio of cyclists back to the north and myself to the south. I was determined to put on some serious miles that day, so I was definitely pumping those pedals as fast as I could pump them. Maybe I was a little too determined that day. I made it to a point about 20 miles north of Newport, around there, and my legs cramped up really bad as I was cycling up a long, gradual incline. I had cycled about 95 miles that day, and none of it was done casually. I had drank plenty of water, eaten plenty of high-energy snacks, including a couple of bananas for potassium, and I had taken a few little breaks. It was just too much for my legs that day, I guess, because as I sat on the bank of the highway, resting, stretching, and snacking, the cramps were not leaving my legs. As I sat there, the thought entered my mind that it was mid-afternoon, and at that time I did not have the foggiest idea how far I had to go until I was in a town where I could crash for the night. I was starting to tire and my legs were still cramping, so it was obvious to me that I was not moving too soon of my own strength. I stuck out my thumb and said a little prayer. God, if it's your will, please help me get to San Diego. Not more than 2 minutes passed when the next car, which happened to be a VW bus, early 70s model, came along and stopped on the shoulder right in front of me. It happened to be a couple of acquaintances of mine. from one of the various schools I attended, which we figured it out at that time, but I forget now. They were on their way to Newport to go surfing, and then they were going to Bend to stay a few days in their grandparents' cabin. The hippie bus was set up as a camper, complete with a sink and small stove. They had just enough room left inside the van for me, my bike, and my bags, and I was scrunched down in a really tight spot right behind the passenger seat. I went surfing with them when we reached Newport, although I only went out and came back in one time. They both told me I did really well considering I had never surfed before. I had skateboarded in my early teens, but that had been so long ago. I was surprised at my ability to remain standing on the surfboard at all. After we had surfed, I opted to take their offer to drop me off in Albany, Oregon, which Interstate 5 runs right through. I was just by there. I was just in Albany not too long ago. But I had, oh, that's right. On my way back from Carson City, Nevada, I stopped by there. Anyway, I had them drop me off at the Motel 6 right by the freeway, since that was the way I was most likely going in the morning. I crashed in the motel room for the night, making my plans for the following morning. I woke early and was out the door soon after the sun rose. My plan was to take a Greyhound bus the rest of the way to San Diego, so I wanted to find the local bus station as early as I could so as not to miss the bus in case it came through early in the day. I found the bus depot, which turned out to be a convenience store where the bus stopped in Albany. I went in the store and purchased a ticket to San Diego. When I got to talking to the guy who had sold me the bus ticket, he let me know Greyhound did not let people transport their bicycles, but that he would remedy that problem for me. My bike had detachable wheels, which made dismantling my bike quicker, and I removed the seat and handlebars as well. It helps when you remember to bring a good set of tools on the road. We then proceeded to stuff my bike into a cardboard box using my saddlebags as cushioning. That was done early, and I had a couple of hours until I had to catch the bus, so I just hung out, smoking cigarettes, drinking coffee, and chatting with the guy when he wasn't busy taking care of other customers or his duties at the store. When the bus came, I put my box containing my bike and saddlebags into the undercarriage of the bus while I brought my backpack onto the bus with me. The ride on the bus from Albany, Oregon to San Diego took about a day and a half. I have never been able to sleep well while traveling down the road, so I was really tired when we finally got to the bus depot in San Diego. As I was attempting to reassemble my bike after everyone exited the bus, I was hitting a snag in the process as I was having trouble getting the handlebars reattached properly. The guy whom I had been sitting next to on the bus for pretty much the entire way down there helped me out, and I was good to go. I went over to a payphone in the bus depot and looked in the phone directory to find a motel, hotel, or hostel nearby, only to discover there was a motel in the upper floors of the building that housed the bus depot. I paid for a room for the night, took a quick nap, and called the local 12-step hotline to find out where the meetings were in the area. I was told of a meeting taking place in about an hour, only a block down the street from where I was. I went to that meeting, introduced myself as a visitor in town for the convention. During the smoke break outside, a woman approached me and said that she and her husband were the chairs of the hospitality committee for the convention. She said that I could stay at their recovery house since they happened to have a few empty beds at the time, which was very beneficial since they didn't charge me anything, and I ended up in San Diego about 2 weeks before the convention. Riding the bus shaved a lot of time off my trip south. The couple that let me stay at the recovery house managed the place and were in recovery themselves. They were really nice people and gave me an open invitation to come over to their apartment, which was on the same property, to have coffee and chit chat anytime I wanted. I only did that once or twice the entire time I stayed there, as I was on vacation and in a new place, thus out for exploration. I had been to San Diego to visit my mom for the summer when I was about 7 years old. Yeah, I think I was 7. But I don't remember all the details of that trip. Since I had nearly 2 weeks until the convention, I got hooked up with other young people in the program that lived in the area and began attending local meetings with them while touring San Diego area at the same time. It was a blast. The speaker meeting I went to on Sunday nights while I was down there took place in a gigantic room where the average attendance at each meeting was 400 to 500 people. While so many people were in town for the convention, attendance had jumped up to around 800. It was standing room only, and not a good place to be if one is claustrophobic, which I am gratefully not. A couple of my new friends and I went to a hotel downtown one day as we were invited to a gathering of young people in recovery. The guy that had given us the invite was an artist who had printed up some t-shirts with a logo he had designed for the young people's group where he lived in Hawaii. I forget whether it was raffle or done randomly, but he gave away 10 of those t-shirts and I got one. I was having the time of my life, but it was to get even better. A few days later, my new friends and I all piled into one of their cars and went to Jack Murphy Stadium for the convention. I had been to some really big meetings before where a bunch of people were gathered for the purpose of recovery, but this was amazing. There was a plethora of people in that stadium. After I got home in Washington, I found out there had been 75,000 people in the stadium that day. I was used to the biggest 12-step meetings back home having an average attendance of 30 to 50 people, just to give you some perspective. I did not have to ride my bike or the bus back home, as it happened that one of my good friends who had driven down to the convention from Washington said I could ride home with him. He had some family to visit in the week following the convention, and I was able to stay on at the recovery house. While waiting for my ride home, that week was spent doing more cruising around town on my bike. I was surprised I did not see many other cyclists on the road in San Diego, but maybe they were just not in the downtown area as I was, since the roads seemed to be busier in metro areas. I do not really mind if roads are busier. It just means one should be more cautious. But then again, as a side note, it seems as though I have heard many stories of bicycle accidents in like downtown Seattle and downtown Tacoma and so forth. I don't know, be it cyclist's fault or driver's fault, whatever. But it happens, so just be cautious. When my friend came to pick me up, he brought something to my attention which I had failed to consider and ask him about, which was my bike. He did not have room enough in his car to bring my bike back to Washington. I opted to go ahead and get a ride home with him rather than find another way to go, which included my bike. It sort of sucked, but what was I to do? After all, I had to get back home so I could get back to work. So we started our trip northward. We made a stop in Beverly Hills, going to a 12-step meeting there. It was just like a meeting back home. There was the same spirit of love and camaraderie at that meeting as I had felt at meetings in Washington. The only difference was that this one happened to be located in Beverly Hills, California. After the meeting, we carried on going north, making a few little pit stops along the way. Oh yeah, I'm going to back up for a moment. Yeah, and I neglected to write it in here. Maybe I totally spaced at the moment, but yeah, during the middle of that meeting, I went outside by myself for a cigarette and walked. I think it was a block or two up the road. It was Rodeo Drive, so I walked up to Rodeo Drive just to, walk a block or two on there, just say, hey, I've walked on Rodeo Drive. But I've been there, done that. Okay, but anyway, back to my story. After the meeting, we carried on going north, making a few little pit stops along the way to fuel up the car, get something to eat, or for me to take a smoke break, as this friend does not smoke. When we got back to Enumclaw and my friend dropped me off at my house, I was sort of annoyed that I was not able to bring my bike back home with me, but for the most part I was grateful that I did not have to ride it all the way home. Oh well, now I was back home and getting back to work, so I would just save up and get another one. That was the plan anyway. I had been back from California for about 3 months when my boss, still unable to stave off relapses into active drug addiction, terminated my job and place to live. He said that he came to the realization that it would be much easier to close his business, which he said was a major trigger for his relapses, and work on his marriage if I was not living with them anymore. For the previous couple of weeks or so, I had been taken by depression and fatigue, although they remained undiagnosed at the time. I had been pushing myself to do my job, let alone get out of bed. When my boss asked me to leave, I called my stepmom to see if she could help me out. She said that her and my brother, who was 10 years old at the time, were renting a room from one of her friends only a few miles from where I was. She told me that I could come crash on their floor if need be. I was without another idea at the moment, so crashing on a floor sounded like a plan. I packed up a backpack with necessities and a couple of changes of clothes and hit the road, hitchhiking to Bonnie Lake, where the floor that I was soon to be sleeping on was located. As per usual, whenever I tried hitching a ride 10 or 20 miles down the road, I ended up walking the majority of the way. When I was running away from home in my teens, it seemed like no problem to hitch a ride that would give me hundreds of miles down the freeway. Yet try to get a ride 2 towns away and end up getting a lot of exercise instead. Go figure. I had been staying with my stepmom and little brother for about a week when I landed a job at Dairy Queen, which happened to be only a few blocks away. If I liked having a roof over my head, it was the wrong job to have since I worked mostly nights. My stepmom's friend, whose house she was renting the room from, was awoken every night when I got back to the house. My stepmom informed me that her friend had told her that I could not stay there anymore, so I grabbed my backpack and hit the pavement. I began couch surfing at various friends' houses in that area, since I did not want to lose my job, which was the only thing I really had going for me at the time. I ended up losing that job after about a month, over eating burgers that had sat on the warmer too long and were to be thrown out anyway. If another day or so passed, I would have been fired for not acquiring my health card anyway. I did have a car that was given to me by a friend of mine, but I did not have a license or the financial ability to pay for the upkeep of the car, such as insurance or gas or whatever. I don't know. I did have a job, so I guess I might have been able to, but yeah. Anyway, yeah. The car was a 1980 Toyota Corolla with baseball-sized dents over the entire body, as if it had either been pelted by a pitching machine or rolled down the side of Mount Rainier. Because of its appearance and the fact that the CO was broken off of the emblem on the rear of the car, I refer to the car as my Toyota Rolla. It was a project car my friend had picked up, but he had never started working on it, and he wanted it out of his yard. It had been sitting at the house my stepmom lived at, but since the guy gave me the boot, I had a friend help me get it moved up to my uncle's backyard a few towns away. Fortunately, the car ran good. The only thing it needed in order to move it to my uncle's place was a jump start since the battery was so old. I could go on for a long time about all the different couches I crashed on for the next few months. I will just say that I am very grateful to all the people who were generous enough to allow me into their homes, if only for one night at a time. One night in particular comes to mind, though. It was dark. The sun had gone down about an hour earlier, and it was starting to cool off quite a bit. It was overcast and starting to sprinkle. I had lots of people in the area that I could call, and I would have had a ride and a place to stay for the night. But on this particular night, my pride stopped me from making a call. I was tired of feeling like a burden on others and just opted to sit in a phone booth for the night. I was walking along the sidewalk thinking about how tired I was, and my legs were sore from walking so much that day when I saw the phone booth. Here was a place to take a rest and stay mostly dry, only my legs and feet sticking out would get wet. I was sitting up, leaning into the corner of the phone booth, and with my neck kinked to the side when a car pulled up to the phone booth. I had been almost asleep, but I slowly stood up and rubbed my neck as it was really sore from being scrunched in that corner. The person who pulled up to use the phone that night happened to be one of my classmates from junior high and high school. I happened to be sitting in the phone booth nearest to her house, and she had to call an ex-boyfriend and did not want him to be able to get her home number or something to that effect. My friend let me sit in her car while she made the call and then took me to her house. After letting me get something to eat, she gave me some blankets to sleep with on her couch after we chatted for a while. We had not seen each other since high school, and we had a bit of catching up to do. As I was falling asleep under warm, dry blankets that night, I was full of gratitude that my plans and designs are not always what happens, and that God has much better plans for me anyway. Sometime in early April 1996, I got in contact with my stepmom to see how her and my brother were getting along. She said they were living with her boyfriend at his house, and as a matter of fact, the travel trailer her and my brother had been living in Bonnie Lake, was sitting vacant on a piece of property owned by one of her friends. She told me I could stay there if I needed a place to go and not to worry about the power or water, just maybe pitch in if I had any money to do so. Of course, I jumped on that opportunity. No more couches. I now had a trailer to stay in, and that beats out any couch or phone booth. I did get a job as a dishwasher at a local restaurant, which one of my friends was a server at. She was the one that told me of the job opening, and she put in a good word for me. I loved having a job and my own place to stay. I did not own the trailer, but it was just me living there. There was a television in the trailer, so I had that to watch when I was not working or going to a meeting. As good as I felt while I was working and trying to save up money, it was to end soon. I was terminated from that job on day number 30, since I had neglected to find a ride down to the health department and get a food handler's card. Yeah, there's my second time. The first time I would have lost. The first time I would have lost that job at Dairy Queen, had I gone on and had been a day or two longer or whatever. Anyway, going right along. I ran into a friend who I had not seen for a year or so at a meeting on a Friday night in June. I had ridden my bike a few miles to the meeting with the notion that I might be able to get a ride home for myself and my bike, as I had done a few times before. That did not happen. After the meeting, my friend, who was also traveling by bicycle, invited me to his place in Enumclaw to watch movies and hang out for the night. The sun was just about below the horizon, and we had just enough light left to make it to his place before it would have been too dark to ride our bikes along the highway. The stretch of highway between Buckley and Enumclaw is always dark at night, with the only light coming from the headlights of cars or the moon, but it only puts out sufficient light one night a month. Yeah, when it's a full moon. We made it to his apartment and watched at least 2 movies that night. In the morning, I decided to hang out with my friend for the remainder of the weekend. It totally beat out going back to the lonely little trailer in Bonnie Lake. Well, I used that for the major reason to move in with my friend. After I'd been staying with my friend for a couple of weeks, I thought about my car that was sitting at the trailer in Bonnie Lake. Once again, I had to have some help from a friend getting the car started, but we got it moved to Enumclaw. While I was there at the trailer, making sure I was not leaving anything behind, I did take note that the power and water had been shut off. I had forgotten to give the property owner money for those bills, but now it worked out since I was moving anyway. Besides, having someone to talk to and do things with is much better than isolation. This friend and I have so much in common, mainly being that we are both survivors of traumatic brain injuries, so we understand the way each other's mind works, and we are both cyclists. I ended up selling my Toyota Corolla to one of our neighbors, as he insisted on paying for it since he needed parts out of it for his station wagon model of the same car. It worked out for him since he saved a few bucks compared to what he would have spent at the local wrecking yard for the parts he needed. Not too long after I started staying with my buddy in Enumclaw, I started going out with a woman that worked as a courtesy clerk at the store in town where my grandma was a checker. I was in the store often to say hi to my grandma, like at least every other day, if not every day sometimes. I was in the store often to say hi to my grandma, so I was acquainted with the courtesy clerk. We had chatted quite a few times, and I was attracted to her. We started going out, and she hung out at mine and my buddy's apartment with me a lot. As I was involved in my 12-step recovery program and meetings, she got involved in a correlating program for friends and family. My roommate had decided that we should move up in the world, as he only had a 1-bedroom apartment and I was still sleeping on his couch. So we put our names on the list for a 2-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. It turned out the apartment next door came open first, so we moved next door. That was great since I finally had a bed instead of a couch to sleep on. This also meant that my girlfriend could spend the night instead of going home alone every night. In September of that year, my roommate got the call he had previously been waiting on, the call saying that the apartment was open on the other side of town. Being a good guy, my friend let my girlfriend and I take the other apartment while he stayed put. We moved into the apartment and got engaged. Having a host of friends in the program turned out to be a very big blessing, as what we needed for our new place that we hadn't already acquired at a local thrift store was given to us by our friends. Just before we got the place of our own, I had gotten another job washing dishes at a restaurant located inside a local hotel. It was a good job. The restaurant was always busy and I was always getting extra hours. A couple of months later, though, the restaurant slowed down and my hours were cut to just weekends. I simply picked up a second job for Monday through Friday, working at Burger King. I worked both jobs for a couple of months, and as fate would have it, my depression and fatigue crept back up and slammed me down hard. My gut was in a knot. I was feeling down and my energy level was minimal. I thought I was just stressed out from working all the time, but when I went to see my doctor, he informed me that I had clinical depression. I felt like total crap and could not perform my duties at Burger King at that time at the rate the job entails, so I was forced to let that job go. The other restaurant I worked at slowed down to the point that they no longer needed me at all, and they even closed down within the next few months. I had been receiving benefits from the state for a couple of years since my income was so low. While I had been working, my benefits had been lowered from the amount I was getting when I wasn't working. Most months I did not get any cash benefits, but only food stamps and medical coverage. Now that I was not working and only my fiancée bringing in money, not enough for the both of us, I started receiving my full benefits from the state again. I was even appointed a disability adjudicator at the local welfare office to work with my attorney who was fighting to get my SSI, Supplemental Security Income, disability approved. I went through a couple more jobs over the next 2 years, trying to get back into the work mode and bring some more money to the table. On my third night at one of those jobs, another restaurant where I washed dishes, the place was extremely busy with multiple high school sports banquets on that same night. I got totally overwhelmed. It seemed like every time I scrubbed a dish, 20 more dirty ones were brought into the dish pit. This went on for about 2 hours. The kitchen manager eventually came over to me and told me that I was moving entirely too slow and just to get out of there. So I left. For the rest of the night and the next couple of weeks, I was feeling more depressed than usual. I felt like I was a total failure. My performance at work on my last night at that job totally sucked, and it was thrown in my face as I was berated and kicked out the door. I tried to find a job that I could do that was not as physically taxing as working in a restaurant, but to no avail. I even went to an agency of the state that supposedly helps people with disabilities find and keep employment, but I was sent packing. Apparently, I may have misunderstood the question when the guy speaking to the group of us newbies asked, "Is there anyone here who is not ready to go to work right now if I had a job lined up for you?" I raised my hand as I had a doctor's appointment to go to later that day. He said to all of us that raised our hands, "You guys can go then. We only work with people that want to and are ready to work now." So I just went back home and got back to the drawing board, racking my brain to come up with something I could do other than sit idly by while life passed me by. Sure, I was engaged and we had an apartment. I was clean and sober and had a spiritual connection to God. I was still going to meetings and being of service in the fellowship. I had many friends and a lot of family members. I could still ride my bicycle everywhere I went. I had so very much to be grateful for, yet something big was still missing and I could not put my finger on it. And at that, I'm going to wrap it up because time's short. And that's about it. That's it for my show today, my reading out of my book. Yeah. And that's it. So I'm just going to wrap it up by saying I'm grateful that if you're viewing and listening to today's show, and as always, stay kind, optimistic, and grateful, and have a phenomenal day and week. And I look forward to seeing you and being here next week. All right. Have a phenomenal week.